Okay, this is part 2 of the Data tab, and we're just finishing up looking at the Query Editor. And in our Transform tab, you can see some of these are similar. You got group by, values, use the first row as headers. You can use transpose, which is basically where you reverse from columns to rows or rows to columns. So if your data comes in oriented incorrectly, then you use the transpose to shift it. You can reverse rows. I'll just click on that to show you what it looks like. That just flipped the whole table upside down, so the bottom ones now show up on the top. We'll reverse that back. Actually, we'll delete both of those. So it's just normal. You can count rows. This is just going to give you a count of how many rows you have. But you can also look down here in the lower corner and it shows you 4 columns, 12 rows. You can do more with data type here. We won't get too into that. And some of these other tools like replace values, which we already looked at, are right here. You can split columns, like when you separate first and last names, like I showed you. We won't get into too much of this stuff. You can modify your date and time. Okay, so that's your transform. Add columns. This is just ways to work with the columns, so you can put additional columns in here. But we won't get into too much of that. But just know that this is where you'd go to create additional columns in your spreadsheet. And then you can go to view. So you can put in a formula bar and so on. But we'll go back to home. Actually, let me get rid of that formula bar real quick. Go back to home. And now that we've finished setting up things, arranging things the way that we want it, we can go ahead and go to close and load. Close and load to. And we're going to say table, new worksheet, and we're going to add this data to the data model. We'll click OK. Now it's creating our query, and you'll see now it's populated it in here. We got first name, last name, phone number. I never did change this to office number, but we could go back into our query editor. Just go to data, go to get data, go to launch query editor, click into here, change this to office number. Click close and load, and you see it updated it. It's better to change it in your query editor so that every time this comes in, it has the correct column heading. If you just went in here and changed it right here, it's not going to always update. Okay, so that's our query. Now whenever we have changes to this data on the original source, we can refresh our data and it's going to refresh it. So that's the get data drop down and how to look at the query editor. And we went into file and did a CSV. You could go from another Excel workbook. You go from a database. You can go into an Access database if you want, like this employee contacts list. So this is an Excel database. This file contains a number of things, some queries, some tables, but if you go into our employees table, it's going to build up a preview. You can see this one's a little more extensive. It's got office IDs. When we scroll to the right, it's got date of birth, employment status. This one is blank. But we can do the same thing. We can pop this into our query editor and we can modify these. So for instance, our date of birth, it's showing the time of day, which we don't need. So we could go edit that. Right now it's on date and time. We could just change it to date. And that cleans it up a little bit. If for some reason we wanted our area code to be separate from the whole phone number, we'd go split column, go by number of characters, take the first 3 once as far left as possible, click OK. You notice it separates it now into the area code and the numbers. And then if we wanted to use this query, we'd just go to close and load. Load to new workbook. You can select this if you want to use it in the data model or not. We'll just go ahead and select it. We'll click OK. You see it's creating that connection again. And there it is. So again, data tab, get data, from database, Microsoft Access. You can go again from Facebook. We're not going to do that. You can do it from a table or range, so you can go to a named table or a named range in your worksheet and pull from that, create a query. And you have all these other options. And we already looked at how to launch the query editor, which is really important to know. Change your data source settings and query options. We won't go too far into that stuff, okay? Now, when you go back up here, you can also go from text CSV right here. You can go into get data and do it here, text CSV. This is the same one. This web option is also the same. Table range, this is the same. Recent sources just allows you to bring up places that you've imported or created queries from before or recently. And then existing connections shows you things that you're connected to right now in the workbook. Okay. Okay, so that's how you use the get and transform data. You can refresh here. You can modify your queries and connections by opening this window. If we click that, it just goes away. If we click that, it brings it up. You can also modify it here. You can close it there. Or you can even grab this. See the four-sided arrow? I can pull it out of here and I can plop it somewhere within the window. If I want to put it back, I just drag it back over, plop it in. Okay? We can go look at properties of this query. So you can choose whether or not you want to adjust your column widths, include row numbers, preserve your column, sort, filter, and layout, or preserve your cell formatting just by clicking on these boxes. You can also affect how your table responds when you have more or less rows by selecting one of these options. We'll cancel out of that. And then the edit links button just allows you to view the other files this spreadsheet is linked to, so you can modify them how you wish. So that's the queries and connections group, and that will conclude this video. And in the next video we'll get into the sort and filter, data tools, forecast, and outline.